Unpacking number 8, the Pastor Matrix. How the Pastoral Epistles were repurposed to train obedience to an office. If you've been in church long enough, you've felt it. You ask a sincere question about leadership, power, accountability, or abuse, and someone reaches for 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, or Titus like a kill switch. A verse gets dropped. The room goes quiet. You're told to submit, trust your pastor, or touch not the anointed. That's not biblical authority. That's conditioning. So let's step out of the Christian matrix and do what believers are supposed to do. Read the text in context and let Scripture correct the traditions we've been trained to treat as sacred. And you may not like where this lands, especially if you're a pastor. If you read the pastoral epistles carefully, the modern pastor role, especially the elevated single apex leader model, doesn't come from the text as a demanded structure. What comes from the text is something older, more Jewish, more communal, more accountable, and honestly, more threatening to institutions that rely on control. What the pastoral epistles are actually doing. These letters don't read like how to build a professional clergy class. They read like immediate triage. Paul charges Timothy to confront different doctrine, empty talk, and teachers who want influence without understanding. 1 Timothy 1:3-7. He warns about people driven by controversy, pride, and greed. 1 Timothy 6:3-10. Titus is sent to set in order what remains, and to stop deceivers who are upsetting whole households. Titus 1:5-11. And 2 Timothy carries the weight of endurance, guarding what's been entrusted, suffering faithfully, finishing well. 2 Timothy 1-4. So here's the first question worth your earnest attention. If these letters were mainly designed to build a modern office called senior pastor, why is the dominant tone urgent protection of communities under threat? The center isn't a stage, it's a people. The controlling metaphor that most modern readings ignore. Paul tells Timothy he's writing so believers know how to behave in the household of God. 1 Timothy 3:15. That's not a throwaway line, it's the lens. A household is relational, moral, publicly visible. It has reputations, patterns, consequences. It is not a corporation. It is not a brand. It is not a religious franchise. And notice what Paul does next. He ties leadership fitness to household faithfulness. If someone can't steward their own home with integrity, how can they care for God's household? 1 Timothy 3:4-5. Elders must be above reproach, not self-willed, not greedy, not violent, able to hold to trustworthy teaching and protect the community from deception. Titus 1:5-9. This is not find the most magnetic personality. This is keep unfit men away from the flock. The pastorals are a safeguard system. The roles on Jewish soil. We need to slow down here because this is where the modern church quietly imports later incentive-driven categories into the Bible. Yes, the pastorals are written in Greek, but they address communities shaped by Israel's scriptures and communal life. The words are Greek. The mental world is deeply Jewish. So when Paul speaks of elders and overseers, he's not inventing a clerical caste. He's drawing on recognizable community roles that already existed in Israel's life together. Elder, Zaken. ZKN. Authority by proven life, not platform. Elder is a covenant community category. Mature, trusted men who carry responsibility because they've been tested. In Israel's story, elders represent, judge, counsel, and stabilize communal life. Exodus 18, Deuteronomy 16, Numbers 11. So when Titus is told to appoint elders in every city, Titus 1:5. The baseline idea isn't hire a religious executive. It's appoint proven men who can shoulder responsibility under God in a household community. Overseer. Pakid. PKYD. Charged stewardship, watchfulness, accountability. Overseer signals stewardship and guardianship, watching, inspecting, safeguarding, not monarchy, not celebrity, not untouchable rank. That's why the qualifications are character-heavy. The role is not a throne. It's a burden, to guard the community from harm and to preserve the integrity of the household. And when you widen the lens beyond the pastorals, the pattern stays consistent. Paul calls the elders of Ephesus together and charges them to guard the flock, Acts 20:17-38. Peter warns elders explicitly not to dominate, shepherd willingly, not for shameful gain, not as lords over the flock, 1 Peter 5:1-3. That creates a serious tension with the modern assumption. If Scripture warns against domination and repeatedly frames leadership as accountable service, why do we treat the single elevated senior pastor model as if it's the natural biblical endpoint? Deacon, service roles that protect community life. The deacon qualifications in 1 Timothy 3:8-13 read like what they are: trustworthy service assignments, integrity, steadiness, tested faithfulness. Jewish communal life already had functional categories for attendants and order keepers, roles that served the assembly without becoming a priestly class. The point isn't to force a one-to-one title match. The point is the logic. Communities need servants, stewards, and trusted support, not a religious monarchy. And that's exactly what makes the modern pastor office reading feel so foreign once you let the text speak. And we have to own this. The Bible is crystal clear that there is no man standing between you and Yeshua. There is one mediator between God and men, the man Messiah Yeshua, 1 Timothy 2:5. He is our high priest, Hebrews 4:14-16. And through him we have direct access to the Father, Ephesians 2:18. Elders and overseers are real roles, but they are not mediators. They don't replace your access, they don't outrank your conscience, and they don't get to become a spiritual gate you must pass through to reach the shepherd. How the modern church misconstrues the pastorals. This is where the matrix shows itself, where you have to decide which pill to swallow. The modern church often reads these letters through an institution-first lens rather than the Bible's household-first lens, and that flips the purpose of the pastorals on its head. A character filter becomes an ordination pipeline. A safeguard becomes a credentialing machine. Servant function becomes protected position. Stewardship becomes status. Sound doctrine becomes conformity enforcement. In the pastorals, sound teaching produces godliness, clean life, endurance, good works, humility, 1 Timothy 4, Titus 2. In institutional culture, sound doctrine often gets reduced to tribal loyalty. Don't question the system, don't embarrass the brand, don't challenge the office. Discipline flips direction. Originally, discipline protects the flock from wolves. In many modern settings, discipline protects the platform from the flock, especially when the flock asks for accountability. And then the final inversion. The office becomes untouchable. Instead of above reproach being the unbending standard, the culture becomes don't touch the anointed. That is not maturity. That is not holiness. That is not biblical leadership. It's immunity. A timeline correction that keeps us honest. Some people react to church abuse and swing to a sloppy story. Constantine invented the church. No, the early communities existed long before Constantine. First-century Jewish soil, real gatherings, real persecution, real discipleship spreading across the empire. But Constantine did change the church's relationship to power. And once the state is near, incentives change. Status changes. Structures calcify. Words like order, authority, and discipline become easier to weaponize. So the question isn't, did Constantine create Christianity? The question is, how did proximity to power reshape the church's instincts and then its reading of texts like these? Government reframing and the drift into policy text reading. When church becomes useful to civic stability, Scripture tends to get treated like institutional policy. You start emphasizing office, hierarchy, centralized control, managed reputation. You start minimizing plurality, mutual accountability, shared responsibility, and the do not domineer warnings that guard the flock. 1 Peter 5:1-3. This is one reason the pastorals have been so easy to weaponize. They speak about order and qualification in a household, and institutions have learned to treat that as license for a clerical system that sits above the household. But the text never gives that permission. The text gives standards so the household remains healthy. The modern mutation, Christian nationalism. Now we're in the present. Christian nationalism isn't Christians voting. It's the fusion of Christianity with national identity and political power, faith as civic glue, dissent as threat. And it tends to do the same thing to the pastorals. Sound doctrine becomes a political loyalty test. Leaders become culture war generals. Accountability becomes attacking the cause. The flock becomes a block to be managed. And when the project must be protected, the clergy class must be protected too. Same inversion, new clothes. The mirror question. So here's where I want to put the text in front of us like a mirror. Am I reading these letters to become sober, faithful, and accountable, or to feel authorized, defended, and in control? Am I protecting the flock, or protecting the system that makes me feel safe? My call to action doesn't change. My call to action is always the same. I will read the text and understand the content in context. And if you do that with the Pastoral Epistles, two things become hard to unsee. The modern pastor role, especially the elevated single apex office, is not a structure the text demands. And the point of these letters is not to build a clergy class above the body, but to protect the household of God through tested, humble, accountable servant leadership. So here's what I'm asking you to do, without excuses and without fear. Read Titus 1, 1 Timothy 3, Acts 20, 1 Peter 5, and Ephesians 4 again, slowly, like your life depends on it. Then ask yourself, honestly, whether you've been discipled by Scripture or by the institution. Because real church is community, shepherds serve the sheep, and nobody is above the body. May the shalom of our Abba guard you. Shalom v'shalva, your brother in the way, Sergio.